That day, I went to my son's house to do what I do best, be a mom. I had a fresh lasagna in my hands, and in my heart, only love for my grandchildren. Their laughter was the only music I needed. I had no idea that at the same time, my son and his wife had set a trap for me, where I was the main character of their own horrifying reality show. While I was tidying up the kitchen, my gaze accidentally fell on a food shelf. Something shiny caught my eye from behind a cereal box. It was a tiny lens, a cold, lifeless eye pointed right at me. In that moment, the world around me ceased to exist. The warmth in my chest was replaced by an icy dread. I understood they were watching. Not the house, not the kids, but me. My own son, whom I loved more than anything in the world, had set up a camera in his home to spy on me. Why? That was the question I was afraid to ask, but I was determined to find the answer because in that moment, I realized that this camera was only the beginning. The real story was hidden deep beneath this lie, and it turned out to be far more cruel than I could have imagined. The sweet, sticky residue of a freshly made peanut butter and jelly sandwich was still on my fingers, a small trophy from a successful afternoon. At 54, I'd learned that the most profound victories aren't celebrated with parades, but with the simple, messy grins of your grandchildren. My two angels, 6-year-old Lily and 8-year-old Jack, were currently in a full-blown pillow fort construction frenzy in the living room, their little faces smeared with jam and a joy so pure it felt like a physical warmth. The sound of their giggles was a melody I'd cross an ocean to hear, and for a few precious hours, it was all mine. My son, Ethan, and his wife, Clara, had been under a tremendous amount of stress lately with their new jobs. They were a couple of ambitious go-getters, the kind of people who lived by their calendars and to-do lists. And bless their hearts, they were exhausted. So when Ethan called and asked if I could come over for the afternoon, my heart melted. Of course I could. I'd drop everything. I'd already prepped their favorite lasagna for dinner, knowing they'd be too tired to cook. It was a small act of love, a way to show my son and his family that no matter how big their world got, I'd always be there to make it a little softer, a little less frantic. As I stood in their kitchen, wiping down the counters and humming an old tune, I felt a deep sense of peace. This was my purpose. This was what I was good for. The humming stopped when my gaze fell on the top shelf of the pantry. Wedged between a box of obscure gluten-free pasta and a stack of fancy, rarely used salad bowls was a tiny lens. I squinted. A small black circle, no bigger than a button, peeking out from behind a cereal box. It was a camera. A tiny, inconspicuous camera, strategically placed with a clear view of the kitchen and the living room beyond. A cold, unwelcome gnat tightened in my stomach. The warmth from the children's laughter seemed to evaporate, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I'd always thought of myself as someone who had a handle on things. I was a problem solver, a mother who had navigated everything from teenage rebellion to midlife crises. But a camera in my son's house? That was a new one. My first thought, a fleeting and hopeful one, was that maybe it was for security. Maybe there had been a break-in. But the absurdity of the placement hit me almost immediately. It was aimed at the busiest part of the house, the place where we spent all our time, not the front door. It was pointed at me. My mind started to race, 1,000 questions all screaming at once. Why? Why would they put a camera here? What were they hoping to see? I suddenly felt exposed, the simple acts of making sandwiches and tidying up feeling theatrical and performative. Was every joke I told, every sip of tea I took being watched? And by whom? My own son and daughter-in-law? The irony of it was so sharp, it almost made me laugh. Here I was, trying to be the perfect selfless mother and grandmother, and they were treating me like a criminal or a trespasser. It was absurd, but the sting was very real. I'd always prided myself on my honesty, on the fact that I had nothing to hide. I was an open book. But this This felt like an attack on that very principle. It was a secret they kept from me, a line they had crossed. I felt a surge of indignation, the kind of raw, unapologetic anger that comes from being blindsided by someone you love. I wanted to storm over there and demand an explanation. I wanted to grab the camera, stomp on it, and then ask them with a tremor in my voice what on earth they were thinking. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath. Years of dealing with life's little betrayals and disappointments had taught me that a reaction, however justified, was rarely the best move. I needed a plan. I needed to know what they were up to. I needed to see what was on that thing. The thought of it made me feel sick, but the alternative, leaving this mystery unsolved, was unbearable. I had to know the truth. The story of my life had been one of constant giving, of doing the right thing, of being there for my family. Now, it felt like my own kindness was being used against me. It's funny how life works, isn't it? You pour your heart and soul into people only to find they're using it to build a case against you. I picked up a cleaning cloth, my hand shaking slightly, and pretended to wipe down the counter directly beneath the lens, my eyes fixed on the small, unblinking red light. It was a small detail, but a crucial one. It meant it was on. It was recording, and I had a feeling that what it was recording was a whole lot more than just me cleaning up after my grandkids. It was recording a turning point, a moment where a loving mother realizes she might be walking into a trap. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happened next. If you like these stories and want to see how this one plays out, you might consider subscribing to the channel. I'm telling you, the rest of this is a doozy. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of Lily and Jack playing dinosaur dentist upstairs. My mind, however, was a storm of static. My initial anger had cooled into a hard, brittle determination. I wasn't just going to stand here and feel sorry for myself. I was going to get to the bottom of this. My son, my Ethan, the boy I'd taught to be honest and fair, was spying on me. The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. I reached up, my hand shaking slightly, and carefully pulled the box of obscure gluten-free pasta off the shelf. I reached for the camera. It was small, light, and surprisingly cold to the touch. A little black rectangle with a nearly invisible lens, a silent sentinel that had been watching my every move. It felt wrong, almost invasive. I half expected it to be bolted down or password protected, but it came right off a magnetic strip on the shelf. The irony wasn't lost on me. They trusted a cheap magnet more than they trusted their own mother. It was a joke. A dark personal joke that I was just starting to get. The camera had a small, removable SD card. I pulled it out and slipped it into the pocket of my jeans. I wasn't some tech genius, but I knew my way around a computer. Ethan and Clara had a new, sleek laptop on the kitchen counter, which they used for work. It was currently open and logged in. I felt another pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the betrayal I felt. This wasn't a violation, it was an investigation into why my own family felt the need to treat me like a suspect. I sat down at the counter, my fingers hovering over the laptop's touchpad. My hands were still sticky from the sandwich making, a reminder of the innocent, loving act that had been happening just moments ago while I was being recorded. It felt like I was crossing a line, but they had crossed it first. I found the file folder for their camera uploads, house_cam footage new, a generic, sterile name for such a personal violation. It was organized by date. I scrolled back past footage of me watering their plants and folding laundry, all the little quiet things I did for them when they weren't looking. The sight of myself, unsuspecting and kind, made my stomach clench. It was a horrifying experience, like watching a movie where you're the hero, but you know something terrible is about to happen to you. And then I saw it, the footage from yesterday. I watched as Clara, my sweet daughter-in-law who always smiled and hugged me hello, walked into the kitchen with Ethan. They were holding their laptops.
I watched, my blood running cold, as they sat down at the very spot I was sitting now. Their faces were serious, their voices low. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was tense. I watched them argue, their hands gesturing wildly. I saw Clara point to the pantry. I watched Ethan nod and then reach up, placing the camera in its hiding spot. The next clip was even worse. They were looking at something on the laptop screen, their faces contorted in expressions of disgust and what looked like disappointment. Clara was shaking her head and Ethan was running a hand through his hair, his eyes wide. I watched him pull up a document on the screen and point at it, his finger jabbing at the words. I couldn't see what it was, but I could feel the malice radiating from the screen. It was so personal, so cold. It was the face of a son I no longer recognized, and the face of a daughter-in-law I had never truly known. I watched them for what felt like an eternity, every movement a new jab to my heart. They weren't just putting up a camera. They were looking at something, talking about me, and it was clearly not good. I needed to see what they were looking at. I needed to know what they were saying, and I was about to find out. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Be home in 10. Hope the kids weren't too much trouble." The words felt like a slap in the face. Trouble? I just discovered a hidden plot against me, and he's worried about the kids being too much trouble? The clock was ticking. I was one click away from seeing the truth, one click away from learning what my family was really capable of, and I had 10 minutes to do it. What I saw next completely shattered my world. It was a secret I never saw coming, and it will change everything. Don't go anywhere. You'll want to see how this one ends.
The screen flickered as my finger trembled over the mouse, the text message from Ethan a cruel, ticking clock in my periphery. Be home in 10. 10 minutes to see the truth. 10 minutes to find out why my son had decided I was no longer worthy of his trust. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked on the file they had been reviewing. It was a Word document, not a video. The title, in a cold, clinical font, was Meredith's Behavioral Log. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a list, a meticulous, horrifying log of my visits, my phone calls, my behaviors. My hand shook so hard I had to put the laptop on my lap to steady it. The entries were dated, time-stamped, and written in a tone so detached it could have been a doctor's report. 11:15, 3:45 p.m. Subject arrived unannounced with baked goods. Insisted on cleaning kitchen. Commented on needing purpose. Overly emotional. 12:02, 11 a.m. Called 5 times in an hour. Expressed anxiety over upcoming doctor's appointment. Paranoid and clingy. 12:20, 7 p.m. Gave children a check for $500 for Christmas. Insisted on doing so in person. Attempting to buy affection. 01:10, 2:30 p.m. Subject brought over an old family album. Began telling stories, repeating details, signs of mild memory loss. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a log of my activities. It was an affidavit. It was a narrative, a twisted version of my own life, meticulously crafted to paint me as something I wasn't. The baked goods were a small thank you. The cleaning was to help them out. The money was a Christmas gift for my grandchildren. And the stories were just me being a grandmother. My small acts of love, my moments of connection had been weaponized, each one twisted into a sign of instability, of desperation, of a declining mind. I scrolled down, my vision blurring with hot, furious tears. The log was detailed, spanning months. It documented everything from my slightly too long conversations to my insistence on helping with the laundry. They were building a case against me. But for what? My eyes darted to a different document on the screen, an open tab in the browser. It was a legal form, a petition for guardianship.
a document to have me declared incompetent and to give them control over my life, my health, and most importantly, my home, my beautiful, quiet home that was my last bit of freedom. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. The hidden camera, the meticulous log, the worried phone calls from Ethan checking on me just to see how I was. It wasn't about love. It was about surveillance. It was about finding every little flaw, every moment of natural human frailty, and blowing it up into a reason to take everything from me. The shock was a physical force, a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a camera, it was a plan. An elaborate, cold-hearted plan to strip me of my dignity, my autonomy, and my very identity. They weren't just my son and daughter-in-law anymore. They were my predators, lying in wait. Suddenly, I heard the faint crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. They were here. My heart leapt into my throat. The laptop was still open, the camera sitting on the counter. I had to move, now. I shoved the camera back onto its magnetic strip, its small, unblinking eye mocking me. I closed the laptop, my fingers flying across the keys, and put it back on the counter, just as the front door handle jiggled. The charade had to continue. I had to pretend that nothing had changed, that I was still the sweet, unsuspecting mother who had just made them a lasagna. And they had to pretend that they weren't trying to destroy me. It was a new game now, one with higher stakes than I had ever imagined, and I had a feeling I was just getting started.
The front door opened, and a forced wave of cheerful air rushed in. Ethan and Clara walked in, their faces tight with exhaustion, but they managed to plaster on their familiar smiles. "Mom, you're still here! Thank goodness," Ethan said, his voice bright, a stark contrast to the cold, calculating tone I'd just seen in the behavioral log notes. The traffic was a nightmare. The kids weren't too much trouble, I hope. The question felt like a test, a casual trap designed to bait me into a response they could log later. I wanted to scream, to shove the laptop at him, and demand to know what kind of son tries to institutionalize his own mother. But I didn't. I smiled a brittle, tight-lipped smile that I hoped looked like relief. "No, of course not. They've been little angels. We've been building a fortress, haven't we, sweethearts?" I called out, my voice too high, too cheery. Clara came over and gave me a quick, fleeting hug. "Thank you so much, Meredith. You're a lifesaver. We just don't know what we'd do without you." The words were a bitter echo of the lies they were living. "You don't know what you'd do without me?" I thought, my mind racing. "You'd be signing papers to take my house. That's what you'd do." I watched as Ethan's eyes flicked to the kitchen counter, a flash of relief on his face when he saw the laptop was closed and everything looked exactly as it should. He didn't see the tiny red light on the SD card I'd just pocketed, a small act of rebellion that felt like a huge victory. He didn't see the silent war that had just begun. My mind, once filled with the mundane thoughts of dinner and laundry, was now a chessboard. I had to make my moves carefully. Confrontation was off the table for now. The behavioral log made it clear they were building a case, not just for fun, but for a legal move. They weren't just being rude, they were being strategic. And if they were playing a game, then I had to learn the rules. "I made some lasagna," I said, forcing a calm tone. "It's in the fridge. I should probably get going. It's getting late." The words felt like a betrayal. I wanted to stay, to watch them, to figure out what their next move was, but I knew I needed to retreat, to analyze, to plan. I couldn't play a game of chess while they were still in control of the board. As I said my goodbyes to the grandchildren, their sticky hugs and jam-smeared kissins felt like a promise, a reason to fight. They were the ones who would suffer if I lost everything. They were the ones who would grow up being told their grandmother was eccentric, unstable, and a burden. My stomach turned at the thought. The kindness I'd always tried to show was now a weakness to be exploited, and I could feel the armor hardening around my heart. The loving, slightly scattered mother they knew was gone. She'd been replaced by a woman with an SD card in her pocket and a fire in her eyes. I drove home in a daze, the city lights a blur of colors. My own house, my sanctuary, now felt like a fortress under siege. They wanted it, along with my life savings. I wasn't a fragile old woman. I was a 54-year-old with a career, with a life, with a strong sense of justice that was now burning hotter than ever. The anger and the tears were still there, but underneath it all was a cold, quiet fury. They had made a terrible mistake. They had underestimated me. I pulled into my driveway, the house dark and silent. As I unlocked the front door, I thought about all the things they had documented in their cruel little log. My unannounced visits, my overly emotional calls, my paranoia. They wanted a case? Fine. I would give them one. But it wouldn't be against me. I would prove to them that a mother's love wasn't a weakness to be exploited, but a force to be reckoned with. The real story hadn't even started yet. You won't want to miss what I found when I started digging into their lives.
The drive home felt like an eternity. Every mile was a new layer of shock and disbelief settling over me, solidifying the cold, hard fact of what I had just discovered. My own son and Clara. The couple I had so readily, so willingly helped, were systematically documenting my life to have me declared incompetent. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The tiny SD card in my pocket felt less like a piece of plastic and more like a ticking bomb, a digital key to the locked door of their betrayal. The moment I got into my house, I went straight to my home office. No time for a cup of tea or a moment to process. This wasn't about feelings anymore. This was about survival. I turned on my trusty old desktop computer and inserted the SD card. The files came up instantly, a mess of video clips and audio recordings, each one meticulously labeled with the date and time. It was a digital diary of my time with them, a highlight reel of my flaws and weaknesses as seen through their judgmental eyes. The sick feeling in my stomach returned as I scrolled through the names. Meredith's Rambling 1220, Meredith's Strange Behavior 115. But I didn't click on the videos. I had a better idea. The legal form they had open on their laptop, the petition for guardianship, had a small space for the petitioner's information. I had caught a glimpse of Ethan's name and Clara's. They were doing this together, a true team effort. But what I also saw in the corner of the form was the name of the law firm. It was a detail they probably didn't think I would notice. I saved the SD card contents onto an encrypted folder on my hard drive and then, with a new purpose, began my research. My first thought was a full frontal assault, confront them. But the logical part of my brain, the part that hadn't been screaming for an hour, reminded me that they had a plan, a legal one. They got a lawyer, a strategy. They were a unified front and I was just me. I was their unstable mother, remember? No, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a panicked emotional meltdown. My response had to be just as calculated, just as cold. I started where most people keep their secrets, their finances. I had access to their bank account for years. I helped them with their bills during a rough patch after the kids were born. I knew their passwords. It was something they had given me, an act of trust, which now felt like a cruel joke. I logged into their online banking. The numbers didn't make sense. Their joint account was almost empty. They had a huge credit card debt and a second mortgage had been taken out on their house just a few months ago. The money was gone, spent. They'd emptied their savings and taken on massive debt. This wasn't about saving me from myself. It was about saving themselves from ruin. My house, my retirement savings, my assets weren't just a solution to a problem. They were their last resort. The anger was back, but this time it was mixed with a new kind of clarity. It wasn't about love, or even about them thinking I was a burden. It was about greed. All of their loving acts, their concern, their constant check-ins, it was a performance, a carefully orchestrated play to make me feel safe while they planned my downfall. I started a new document on my computer, Ethan and Clara's financial log.
I began meticulously copying their spending habits, their transactions, every detail I could find. It was a mirror image of the document they had created for me, but this time the truth was on my side. Their debt, their recent extravagant purchases, their frantic spending, it all painted a very different picture. The children's private school tuition, a new sports car Ethan had been talking about, and Clara's designer clothes, it was all there, the ugly truth hidden behind their perfect suburban facade. They were living far beyond their means, and they were desperate. They needed my money, and they were willing to tear down my life to get it. I had been so focused on proving my own sanity that I had forgotten to check theirs. The irony of it all almost made me smile. They thought I was the one losing my mind, but it was their world that was falling apart, and I had just found all the evidence I needed. This was the moment the game changed. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the hunter.
I felt a cold calm settle over me, a tranquility that only comes from knowing the enemy's true face. The screen of my computer was a portal to their lies, a ledger of their hypocrisy. Their debts were staggering, and a recent, exorbitant credit card bill from a high-end travel agency caught my eye. They'd booked a lavish, all-inclusive vacation to Bali, a trip they'd probably hoped to pay for with my retirement savings. It was a slap in the face. All their talk about needing to save, to sacrifice, while they were living a life of secret, extravagant indulgence. But there was something else, something buried deeper. Their second mortgage application had been rejected initially, then suddenly approved. I scrolled through their emails, using a password I knew they'd never change, and found the correspondence. It wasn't the bank that had changed its mind. It was a private lender, a shadow company with a name I had never heard before. The terms were brutal, the interest rate astronomical. I recognized the email address of the person who had approved it, and a chill went down my spine. It was a colleague of Ethan's, someone he'd always complained about, a man who was known for shady business dealings and a history of exploiting people in a bind. The plot was thicker than I could have imagined. They weren't just trying to get my money. They were in deep, over their heads, tangled up in a web of bad decisions and worse people. My heart, which had been so full of fury, now felt a twinge of something else. A cold, hard sense of purpose. I wasn't fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my grandchildren, for the legacy I was trying to build for them, one that didn't include the shame and deceit of their parents. I spent the rest of the night creating a timeline. I cross-referenced their financial transactions with the dates in the behavioral log they had so carefully compiled about me. The connections were unmistakable. Every time their financial stress peaked, they would log another incident of my unstable behavior. My last phone call to them, expressing my fear for them because of their stress, was logged as paranoid and clingy. My desire to help them financially was twisted into trying to buy affection. My heart ached, but I didn't cry. I was too busy planning. I knew my next move had to be perfect. I couldn't confront them directly. They would just deny it, and their lawyer would have them deny my claims as the product of a troubled mind. No, I had to play their game, but I was going to use my own rules. I had to make them come to me, and I had to make sure they knew I wasn't the weak old woman they thought I was. I made a phone call the next morning. It was to an old friend of mine, a woman who had worked for years as a private investigator. She was the kind of person you called when you needed a problem solved, not when you needed a shoulder to cry on. I laid it all out for her, from the hidden camera to their second mortgage and their plan to take my house. "They think I'm losing it, Brenda," I said, my voice steady. "They have a whole log of my supposed behavior. What I need you to do is create a log of theirs." "You want me to spy on your own son?" she asked,
her voice a mix of disbelief and morbid curiosity. "No," I replied, a small, dark smile spreading across my face. "I want you to show them what a real breakdown looks like. And it's not mine." My next step would be to plant a seed of doubt in their minds, to make them think their little plan was in danger of unraveling. This was my move, and I knew exactly how to deliver it. I was going to turn their own game against them, and the result was going to be an emotional and financial war they never saw coming. What happens next? You'll have to keep watching to see how a mother's love, betrayed and broken, becomes a weapon more powerful than any they could have imagined.
My new normal was a silent war. My son, Ethan, and his wife, Clara, continued to call me, their voices laced with that fake concern I now knew was a performance. I played along, keeping my own voice cheerful and oblivious, but every conversation was a tightrope walk. They asked about my day, about my friends, about anything that might sound like a new sign for their despicable log, and I, armed with a new kind of power, answered their questions with carefully chosen words that were designed to plant a seed of chaos. My private investigator friend, Brenda, had been a godsend. She was a woman who could find a ghost social security number, and she went to work on Clara with a quiet, lethal efficiency. I had a theory. Their financial woes weren't just poor choices. There was something else, something bigger, and Clara was at the center of it. She worked as an accountant for a high-end fashion boutique downtown, a job that paid well, but not well enough to explain the numerous Sadies in their driveway, the lavish Bali vacation, and the sudden, massive debt. Brenta's first email was a cold, clinical punch to the gut. The private lender they'd gone to wasn't just shady, it was a front, a shell company for a larger, more sinister operation. It was a well-known money laundering business, a fact that had been brought up in a few financial crime blogs Brenda had dug up. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was who had referred them to the company. It wasn't Ethan's colleague, it was Clara's boss, the owner of the boutique. The revelation was a tectonic shift in my understanding. Ethan was in on it, of course, but Clara, my sweet, quiet, unassuming daughter-in-law, was the true instigator. She was the one who was sinking them deeper and deeper into a world of debt and deceit. She was the architect of their ruin, and their plan to seize my house was a desperate attempt to cover her tracks. I had to know for sure. I needed proof. Brenda sent me a few more files buried deep in a financial form that Clara used to frequent. One of them was an encrypted chat log. The password was Clara's mother's birthday, a small, pathetic detail that made her seem more human and more of a traitor. I unlocked the file and scrolled through the chat history. The words were clinical, cold. Clara was talking about moving funds and adjusting ledgers. She was helping her boss cook the books. She wasn't just an accountant. She was a partner in crime. The conversations were full of financial jargon, but the motive was clear. They were stealing from the business, and they were trying to move their own money through a shell company to make it clean. But their plan had gone sideways. A recent audit had put them in a dangerous spot, and they needed a huge sum of money fast to fix the mess and not get caught. My house wasn't just for a lavish life. It was to save them from prison. The next day, I called Ethan and Clara and asked them to come over for dinner. My voice was calm, almost cheerful. I told them I had something important to tell them, something about a change in my will. The bait was in the water. I had their motive, I had their secrets, and I had a plan. This was the moment I stopped being the victim and started being the predator. I had spent my life building a family, and they had spent theirs trying to tear me down. Now I was going to use their own house of cards to bring them down, brick by carefully laid brick. I was going to turn my kindness into a weapon,
and their greed into their downfall. The game was on. I was ready to play.
The tension in the air was so thick you could have sliced it with a steak knife. I sat across the dining room table from my son and daughter-in-law, a plate of my lasagna sitting between us like a symbol of all our broken promises. Ethan and Clara tried to make small talk, but their smiles were brittle, and their eyes darted nervously between the front door and the windows, as if expecting a team of federal agents to burst in at any moment. The little bomb I had dropped on them earlier, the casual invitation to discuss a change in my will, was a poison they were already digesting. "It's delicious, Mom," Ethan said, picking at his food. "Really, it is, but you mentioned something on the phone." "Oh, that," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my iced tea. I was in no hurry. The longer this went on, the more they'd sweat. "Well, I've just been doing some thinking lately, about a lot of things. My life, my legacy, the will." I watched as Clara's hand, which had been resting on the table, curled into a fist in her lap. "That's very smart, Meredith," she said, her voice strained. "It's good to be proactive." "Yes, it is," I agreed, a smile playing on my lips. "I was looking through an old family photo album the other day, the one you logged as me having mild memory loss after I tried to show it to you. Remember?" The color drained from their faces, their perfect composed masks cracking. Clara's eyes went wide, and Ethan's fork clattered against his plate. They had no idea I knew about the log. They thought their surveillance was a secret, and in that one sentence I had shown them it wasn't. "You're right, Ethan," I continued, ignoring their stunned silence. "I'm not as stable as I used to be." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "The things I'm seeing now, the secrets, they would shock anyone." I watched as they exchanged a frantic, silent glance. They were trying to figure out what I meant. What secrets? The camera? The log? Or something else entirely? I decided to give them a clue. "It's just funny how people are so convinced they can hide things. Like that new car, Ethan. That big, fancy sports car. Did you tell Clara about the money from the private lender that paid for it? Or did you just tell her it was a loan?" The explosion was instant. Clara's face turned from pale to scarlet as she whipped her head toward her husband. "What is she talking about, Ethan?" she hissed, her voice low and full of venom. Ethan's eyes were filled with panic. "It's nothing, Clara. I had to go into so much debt. I was trying to save us, Ethan, and you went and bought a car with that money?" she screamed. The polite little couple, the ambitious go-getters, were tearing each other apart right in front of me. I held up my hands, feigning innocence. "Oh my, I'm sorry. I thought you two knew all about each other's finances. After all, you've been so transparent with me." The sarcasm was so thick it was practically a physical presence in the room. "How do you know about that?" Clara demanded, her fury now directed at me. "Who told you?" I just smiled, a cruel, cold expression that I hadn't seen on my face in years. A mother knows. We have our little ways of keeping track of our children, my little hobbies. The rage in their eyes was so pure, so potent. It was almost beautiful. They had tried to trap me, to label me as crazy, and I had just shown them who the real sociopaths were. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a psychological war, and they were losing. They had built their entire plan on the foundation that I was weak and clueless, but I had just shown them their foundation was built on a lie. They were both trapped in a web of deceit, and the spider was finally ready to play. Now you've seen what happens when a mother's kindness is mistaken for weakness. The truth is out, but the war has just begun. The climax is right around the corner, and believe me, you won't want to miss how I finally bring them down.
The air in their house the next morning was thick with silent recriminations. The night before had ended in a chaotic screaming match between Ethan and Clara, a raw display of rage and betrayal that they had, until now, only aimed at me. I had returned to my own home, leaving them to pick up the pieces of their shattered facade. My phone was silent. I knew they were panicking, their little world of secrets now exposed. I gave them 24 hours to stew in their own private hell. Then, armed with a briefcase filled with carefully printed documents, I returned to their house unannounced. I walked through the door with a key I still had, a final testament to the trust they had abused. Clara and Ethan were sitting at the kitchen table, looking like two shipwrecked survivors. Their perfect hair was a mess, their eyes were red, and the air around them was heavy with despair. I placed the briefcase on the table and unlatched it. The sound echoed in the silent room. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm and cold. "But this time, we're going to talk about the truth." I laid out the files in front of them, one by one. The screenshots of their empty bank accounts, the credit card statements with the massive debt from their lavish Bali trip, the correspondence with the shady money laundering firm, the chat logs from the financial forum where Clara discussed adjusting ledgers for her boss, and finally the petition for guardianship, the document with their names on it, intended to strip me of everything I owned. Clara's face went white as she saw the documents. Ethan snatched the petition and stared at it, his own guilt and fear now a palpable presence. "Mom, this is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice a pathetic whimper. We needed help." "Help?" I asked, my voice rising. "You didn't ask for help, Ethan. You planned to steal my entire life's work. You tried to prove I was crazy, to cover for your own financial crimes. This wasn't a cry for help. This was a criminal conspiracy. I have a log of every one of your financial mistakes, every single lie, every bit of your debt. I know everything." The silence that followed was the most powerful thing I have ever experienced. I watched my son, the boy I had raised with so much love, crumble before my eyes. Clara, the woman who had pretended to be my friend, sat motionless, her scheme laid bare for all to see. My private investigator, Brenda, is ready to submit this evidence to the authorities. The money laundering, the fraud, it will ruin you. It will land Clara's boss in jail and Ethan as his accessory. Your lives are over. "Mom, no," Ethan cried, a tear streaking down his face. "Please, no." "There is a way to make this go away," I said, my voice unwavering. "You will not touch my assets, my home, or my retirement. Not now, not ever. You will sign over the title to your home to me, and I will assume your debts. In return, I will not release this information to the authorities. You will not see a dime from me, and you will work to pay off your debts to me for years. You will rebuild your lives, but you will do it on your own terms. Your lavish vacations and your fancy car are gone. You will live a life of honesty, and you will learn to appreciate what you have." They had no words left. Their expressions were a mix of rage, despair, and disbelief. They were cornered. They had lost everything they had so desperately wanted to hide, and their only way out was to accept my terms. I wasn't being cruel. I was being a mother. I was teaching them a lesson in a language they finally understood. Consequences. The final papers were in the briefcase, just waiting for their signatures. The game was over. They had lost. The only question now was whether they would choose prison or my terms.
The silence stretched on, a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame and despair. For a long, excruciating minute, Ethan and Clara just stared at me, at the briefcase, at the damning evidence of their greed. I could see the battle raging in their eyes, the urge to scream, to deny, to fight for their perfect lives. But they were defeated. The war had been over the moment I had walked through the door with that briefcase, and they knew it. Finally, Ethan's shoulders slumped. "Mom," he whispered, his voice broken and hollow, "why? Why are you doing this to us?"
I'm not doing this to you, Ethan, I replied, my voice now softer, laced with a sadness that ran deeper than anger. You did this to yourselves. I'm just holding up a mirror so you can finally see the people you've become. The moral clarity of my victory was the most shocking part of it all. I wasn't a villain. I was a mother, doing what had to be done to save my family from themselves. I watched them sign the documents, their hands trembling, their faces pale. The beautiful two-story house, the place where my grandchildren's laughter had been so carefully recorded for a behavioral log, now belonged to me. The heavy burden of their debt was now legally my own, but it was a small price to pay for the peace of mind and the sense of justice I was about to reclaim. As they finished, I closed the briefcase and stood up. The lawyers will handle the rest, I said, a final note of authority in my voice. You have until the end of the month to move your things into the basement. The basement apartment is where you will live. You will pay me rent, and you will pay off your debt. I am not your mother anymore. I am your creditor, and I am your landlord. The shock on their faces was priceless. They had expected me to send them away, to cut them off entirely. They had not anticipated a future where they would be forced to live under my roof, under my rules, forever indebted to the woman they had tried to destroy. This wasn't just a defeat. It was a constant, living reminder of their betrayal. I walked out of the house, leaving them to their despair. The air outside felt clean and fresh. I got into my car and drove back to my own home, the place that no longer felt like a fortress, but like a sanctuary. It was my final victory, not because I had taken something from them, but because I had reclaimed my dignity. I had shown them that a mother's love wasn't a weakness to be exploited, but a force to be reckoned with. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Lily, my granddaughter. "Grandma, why are Mom and Dad so sad?" she asked, her voice small. "Will you come over and make us sandwiches?" My heart, which had been so cold for so long, finally began to thaw. I would not allow their deceit to poison my relationship with the children. My purpose was always to protect my family, and I had done just that. I had saved myself, and perhaps in a very hard and very painful way, I had saved them too. The perfect ending wasn't a grand revenge. It was the quiet, sweet, and sticky victory of a mother's love finally returning home.